Okay, picture this. You are 21 years old. You aren't just rich. You are British Empire aristocrat rich. You're witty, you're the life of every party, and you've just been elected to Parliament. Oh, and your best friend from college.
Yeah.
He's William Pitt, and he's about to become the youngest prime minister in history.
It's basically the ultimate winning at life starter pack.
Right. The world is just handed to you on a silver platter. You're destined for power, maybe even the prime ministership yourself.
Sure.
But then you do something that makes absolutely no sense to anyone around you. You decide to throw all your political capital into a meat grinder.
A huge one.
You decide to pick a fight with the single most powerful economic engine of the entire British Empire.
An engine that was generating millions of pounds and was defended by, well, the most powerful people in London.
Exactly. We are talking about the end of the British slave trade and the man at the center of it, William Wilberforce. But we are not just doing a biography today. We've got a stack of sources here. Some historical diaries, some heavy theological papers, and even some modern economic analysis. And they paint a much more complicated picture than the standard hero story.
It is complicated because usually when we tell this story, it's very simple. Wilberforce became a Christian, saw slavery was bad, and stopped it.
Right.
But the sources we're looking at today suggest it was actually a grueling, nasty, 40-year street fight.
And what I really want to figure out is the why. How does a personal religious conversion in 1785 turn a wealthy, ambitious party animal into the leader of a battle that wrecked his health and, arguably cost him his career?
That is the core question. And as we dig into these sources, especially the ones analyzing the religious debates of the time, you'll see that this wasn't just a political struggle.
No.
It was a battle for the soul of the nation and, bizarrely, a battle over how to read the Bible.
That was the thing in the reading that really threw me. I always assumed it was the Bible versus the secular world, but you're saying it was the Bible versus the Bible.
That is exactly what it was. And honestly, the pro-slavery side had some very strong arguments, textually speaking, which is something we often forget.
Okay, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's set the scene. Late 1700s, the Industrial Revolution is just starting to rev up. What's the vibe in Britain?
The vibe is distinct. Sugar is king. The Caribbean colonies are generating massive wealth, and that wealth is entirely dependent on the Atlantic slave trade.
It's not a side industry.
Oh, no, it's the fuel of the empire. And into this world steps William Wilberforce. As you said, he's young, he's connected, and he's living the high life.
And then 1785 happens, the Great Change.
Right. He goes on a tour of Europe, starts reading some religious tracts, and undergoes this profound conversion to evangelical Christianity.
And we need to be clear, this wasn't just him deciding to go to church on Sundays.
Not at all. This was a complete restructuring of his reality. He became deeply convicted of his own sinfulness and the need for, redemption.
So usually when people in that era had a conversion like that, didn't they just leave? I mean, didn't they quit their worldly jobs and go become monks or priests or something?
That is exactly what Wilberforce wanted to do. He looked at the dirty, compromising world of politics and thought, I can't be a Christian here. He was ready to resign.
So who stopped them?
This is where the story gets really cinematic. He decides to consult with a man named John Newton.
The Amazing Grace guy.
The very same. But before Newton was a clergyman writing hymns, he was a slave ship captain.
Wow.
And I don't mean he just invested in it. He was on the boats. He knew the smell of the hold. He knew the violence of it intimately. Later in life, after his own conversion, he was just haunted by what he had done.
So you have the young, idealistic politician asking for advice from the old, repentant ex-slaver. That must have been a heavy conversation.
Incredibly. And Newton essentially tells him, do not quit. He told Wilberforce that God had placed him in Parliament for a reason. He urged him to stay in the filth of politics because that's where the change had to happen.
And that advice leads to the famous diary entry, right? I have it here in the notes. It says, God has set before me two great objects, the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of manners.
Manners? There meaning morality. It's a huge mission statement. He's basically saying, I'm going to stop the biggest industry in the world, and I'm going to make British society nicer.
Talk about ambitious. But he wasn't doing this solo, was he? I kept seeing references to the Clapham Sect. Is that like a secret society?
It sounds like one, doesn't it? But no, it was basically a neighborhood group.
Okay.
A cluster of wealthy evangelical families who all lived around Clapham Common in London. Think of them as a kind of think tank. They had the money, the research, and this relentless drive.
So Wilberforce was the front man in Parliament.
And the Clapham Sect was the engine room.
And he also got some encouragement from John Wesley, the founder of Methodism.
Mm.
I read that letter in the source material, and it honestly gave me chills. It was written just days before Wesley died.
It's incredibly dramatic. Wesley writes to him and says, "Unless God has raised you up for this very thing, you will be worn out by the opposition of men and devils."
Men and devils. He wasn't sugarcoating it.
No. Wesley called American slavery the vilest that ever saw the sun. He knew Wilberforce was about to walk into a buzzsaw. He was warning him, if you do this, they will try to destroy you.
Okay, so Wilberforce is pumped up. He's got his mission. He's got his squad. He goes into Parliament and says, guys, slavery is a sin. We have to stop it. And this is where we hit that theological wall you mentioned earlier. Because I assume the bad guys would just say, we like money. But the sources say they actually opened their Bibles and argued back.
They did. And this is the part that is really uncomfortable for modern listeners, but you have to understand it. The pro-slavery lobby, and later, the Southern theologians in the U.S., they were not secular atheists. They were often devout Christians who believed they had the Bible on their side.
So how on earth do you use the Bible to defend the Atlantic slave trade?
You use what we call a literalist hermeneutic. Basically, you look at the specific rules written in the text.
Okay.
They would point to Leviticus 25. The Mosaic Law explicitly allowed the Israelites to buy slaves from the nations around them. They'd say, look, God wrote the law, and the law allows for owning people. Are you holier than God?
That's a tough argument to beat if you believe every word is literal law.
It gets stickier. They'd point to Abraham, the father of the faith, who owned slaves. Then they'd go to the New Testament. Jesus walked the earth during the Roman Empire where slavery was everywhere. Did he ever explicitly say slavery is wrong?
I'm guessing the answer is no.
Explicitly, no. And then they play their trump card, the Apostle Paul. He writes letters to churches and says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling.
Oof. Okay, I see the problem. If you are Wilberforce and you stand up and say slavery is unchristian, and your opponent stands up and reads that verse,
you look like you're arguing against the Bible. Precisely. In fact, one of the most interesting sources in our stack is an essay from a modern atheist scholar perspective. This scholar argues that, logically speaking, the pro-slavery side actually had the better case if you stick strictly to the text.
So the source notes that Wilberforce actually tried to avoid quoting the Bible in Parliament.
Yes.
Wait, really? The great Christian hero didn't want to bring the Bible into the debate?
Because he knew he would lose that specific battle. If he quoted a psalm about mercy, they would quote a law about property. He realized that a verse-for-verse fight was a tactical dead end.
So how do you get around that? If you can't win on the letter of the law, what do you do?
You shift the battlefield. Wilberforce and his allies, people like Grenville Sharp, started arguing for the spirit of the text over the letter.
The principles.
Exactly. They argued that the broad principles of Christianity made slavery impossible, regardless of what a specific ancient law said.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of principles?
The golden rule is the big one, Matthew 7:12. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Which is pretty hard to reconcile with chaining a guy to a plank in a ship's hold.
It's impossible. You can't love your neighbor as yourself and own him as property. They also leaned heavily on the concept of imago Dei, the idea that all humans are created in the image of God.
So if an African man is made in God's image, and Christ died for him,
how can you sell him like a sack of sugar?
I also saw a note about man stealing. Was that a legal thing or a religious thing?
Both. This is a really clever pivot. They went back to Exodus 21.1, which says, "He that stealeth a man and selleth him shall surely be put to death."
So they argued that the slave trade wasn't servitude, it was kidnapping.
Bingo. They argued that since the Atlantic trade relied on kidnapping free people in Africa, the entire supply chain was a lively. It was fruit of the poisonous tree. Even if you believed biblical slavery was okay, this slavery was based on a capital crime.
That is a smart legal loophole. So they have their arguments, they introduce the bill to abolish the slave trade, and what happens?
They lose.
Once.
Over and over and over again for 18 years.
18 years.
We love to watch the movie where the hero gives the speech, the music swells, and the gavel bangs, but this was a grind. He introduced bills in 1791, 1792, 1793, and got beaten back every single time.
Why was it so hard? If they had the moral high ground, why wouldn't Parliament budge?
Fear. You have to remember the context. 1790s. Across the channel, the French Revolution is happening.
Right.
They're chopping off the heads of kings and aristocrats. The British establishment was terrified of radicalism.
So when Wilberforce says freedom They hear guillotine.
Exactly. He was seen as a dangerous radical for a while. Plus, the money was it was too good. The West Indian lobby was incredibly powerful. They bribed MPs. They controlled the press. Wilberforce was fighting the entire establishment.
And the man was sick, right? This wasn't a healthy guy fighting the good fight.
No, he was falling apart. The sources detail his medical history: ulcerative colitis, terrible eyesight, a curved spine. He was often bedridden for weeks.
And he was taking opium daily.
Just to manage the pain, which was standard for the time but obviously takes a toll.
That really adds weight to the conversion aspect. If he was just doing this for political clout, he would have quit.
He would have quit in year 2. The only thing that explains his stamina sticking with it for 18 years of failure and pain is that he truly believed he was answerable to God.
He believed that if he gave up,
He was damning his own soul.
Now, I want to push back on this heroic Christian narrative for a second. We have a source here that brings up the capitalism and slavery thesis by Eric Williams.
Yes, the classic counter-argument.
Basically, this argument says, look, Britain didn't end slavery because they suddenly got religion. They ended it because it stopped making money. Is there truth to that?
It's the great debate of 19th century history. Williams argued that the industrial economy was changing. Britain was moving toward factory work wage labor.
And wage labor is often cheaper than slave labor.
It is. A lot of people don't realize that.
How is paying people cheaper than not paying them?
Because you don't have to buy the worker. You don't have to feed them when they're old or sick. If the economy crashes, you just fire them. Slaves are a massive capital investment. Plus, the sugar plantations were inefficient. They relied on protectionism, special tariffs that kept sugar prices high. The new industrial capitalists wanted free trade.
So the factory owners in Manchester basically saw the slave owners in Jamaica as economic dinosaurs.
That's a good way to put it. So the argument is that the morality was just a convenient cover story for a ruthless economic shift.
That is a cynical take.
It is, but it has weight. However, most modern sources in our stack suggest it was a convergence. The economics created the opportunity, but you still needed the catalyst.
You needed a spark.
Right. Profitable things don't just go away on their own. You needed someone like Wilberforce to mobilize the public and force the issue.
And he was good at that mobilization.
A master strategist. He basically invented modern campaigning. Petitions, boycotts of sugar. He even had merch.
The Wedgwood Medallion.
Am I not a man and a brother? It was on snuff boxes, cufflinks, hairpins. He made abolition a fashion statement. And he framed it brilliantly. He didn't just say help the slaves. He said save Britain.
Save Britain from what?
From God's wrath. He argued that national sin leads to national judgment. If Britain didn't stop this, God would punish the country. That terrified the public.
So fast forward, 1807. The persistence pays off. The Abolition of the Slave Trade Act passes.
It's a landslide. The whole House of Commons stands up and cheers for Wilberforce. He sits there with his head in his hands, just weeping.
Mission accomplished.
Well, this is the catch, and it's a big one.
Yeah.
The 1807 Act only stopped the ships. It stopped the trade across the ocean.
But it didn't free the people already on the plantations.
Not a single one. If you were a slave in Jamaica in 1808, your life didn't change. The abolitionists thought that if they cut off the supply, the owners would have to treat their slaves better, and the system would just kind of wither away.
Were they right?
They were completely wrong. The system just became more brutal to squeeze out more production. So Wilberforce realizes the job isn't done. But he's old, he's sick, and the political will is gone.
So what happens in that gap? There's, what, a 26-year gap between the slave trade ban and actual emancipation? That feels like a lifetime.
It was a lifetime for those enslaved. It was a time of massive frustration. The Clapham Sect is getting old. New, younger radicals are coming up saying, this is taking too long.
And you have slave rebellions.
Yes, in the Caribbean, like the Baptist War in Jamaica, where enslaved people are taking matters into their own hands. It became clear that gradual change wasn't working.
So we get to 1833, the very end of Wilberforce's life.
He is literally on his deathbed.
Yeah.
And Parliament is finally debating the Emancipation Bill to ban slavery completely.
But, and this was the part of the research that made my jaw drop, there was a huge condition attached to the freedom.
The compensation.
The government agreed to pay compensation for the loss of property. But they didn't pay the enslaved people. They paid the owners.
Correct. To get the bill passed, they had to buy off the slave owners. The British government took out a loan of £20 million.
Which doesn't sound like a lot today, but back then.
It was 40% of the entire national budget. It was so huge that the British taxpayer only finished paying off the interest on that loan in 2015.
Wait, hang on. You're telling me that living taxpayers in 2015 were still effectively paying for the buyout of slave owners from 1833?
Technically, yes. It just shows you the scale of the property interest they were fighting.
That is morally revolting.
It is. It's a pragmatic compromise that leaves a bitter taste. But from Wilberforce's perspective, he had one goal: end the institution. He swallowed the poison pill to get the cure.
And the timing.
3 days. The bill passes its final crucial reading just 3 days before Wilberforce dies.
Wow.
He gets the news, says a prayer of thanks that he lived to see the day Britain was willing to pay 20 million pounds to abolish slavery, and then he passes away.
You literally couldn't write a better ending for a movie.
It's poetic, but it leaves us with this really complex legacy.
So let's wrap this up. We started with a question. How did a conversion turn a politician into a crusader?
I think the answer is stamina. The economic arguments were there, the political arguments were there, but those things shift with the wind. What the conversion gave Wilberforce was the ability to endure 40 years of failure because he believed the stakes were eternal.
He effectively weaponized his own fear of judgment for the good of humanity.
That's a great way to put it.
And what about the Bible versus Bible thing? What's the takeaway there?
That's the lasting so what of this deep dive. This conflict changed how the Western world reads religious texts. It forced a shift from literalism, doing exactly what the verse says, to principlism, following the spirit of justice and mercy. We don't realize it, but every time we debate social issues today, we are using the interpretive tools that the abolitionists forged in this fire.
Here's a thought to leave you with. We look back at Wilberforce as a hero and the slave owners as villains. But for decades, the villains were making the most money. It makes you look at our current economy a bit differently. What are the things we rely on today? Cheap electronics, fast fashion, rare earth minerals that are produced in terrible conditions. And 50 years from now, will people say, oh, they only stopped that when it became profitable to stop it?
That is the uncomfortable question. Does morality shape the economy? Or does the economy decide which morality we can afford?
Something to chew on. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into William Wilberforce. We'll catch you on the next one.